Hello everyone, my name is Mara and I'm a first year student in the Master of Linguistics course studying full-time online. I'm glad to present to you today my first article for the semester, The Discursive Co-Construction of Knowledge, Identity and Difference, an Ethnography of Communication in High School Mainstream by Patricia A. Duff. The article was published in the Oxford University Press in 2002. So to give you an overview of the content of the article examines the use of ethnography of communication as a research method in analysing classroom discourse, specifically how the knowledge, identity and differences of participants are constructed and positioned. The article does this in two ways. Firstly, by giving an overview of current understandings of the issue, and secondly, by describing the author's ethnography of communication study of a Canadian high school social studies class. I'll now go through the content of the article in chronological order, responding to the key theoretical concepts and critiquing the methodology. The article firstly discusses the importance of researching social, linguistic, and cultural heterogeneity in classroom contexts. It comments that the marginalisation of students from diverse backgrounds has been recognised as an issue from both research revealing high rates of bullying, violence, suicide, discrimination and poverty among school-aged children, as well as major instances such as the outbreak of violence at Columbine High School in 1999. The article concedes that while creating cohesive classroom environments that respect and accommodate diversity is recognised as a favourable outcome, achieving such an environment in reality is still a seemingly elusive goal. One reason provided for the marginalisation of students from diverse backgrounds, including those from an English as a second or subsequent language background, is that privileged voices often dominate discussion within the classroom. These more dominant voices are able to create connections and a social and academic network extending beyond the classroom. On the other hand, quiet or silent students may appear disengaged and disconnected from the classroom discourse and are thus perceived as deficient and inconsequential by peers and perhaps staff. The article postulates that this exclusion from discourse puts adolescents at risk. Thus, it is imperative that we research ways to create constructive and cohesive learning environments, wherein the identities of students and teachers, as well as the subject matter, is negotiated in respectful and equitable ways. The article goes on to describe language socialisation within a classroom context. Language socialisation is the process whereby newcomers to an environment acclimatise to cultural practices and develop into proficient members of the discourse community. The article cites whole class discussions as a specific activity which mediates language socialisation for newcomer students. It is explained that such students can reveal and develop aspects of their identity through contributions to discussion. However, this process is more complex than one might initially realise, as model student performance may in some instances actually alienate students from their peers. Furthermore, the assumption that modelling target culture practices is necessarily more desirable, virtuous, inevitable, or complete is not always accurate. Non-conformity, partial membership to the discourse community, and membership to multiple discourse communities are all valid experiences. Thus, the article highlights the ways issues of identity, agency, and difference are intertwined with participation in classroom activities such as class discussions. The acknowledgement of the multiplicity of possibilities for language socialisation within the classroom environment and within an individual is consistent with the post-structuralist view of fluidity and instability of meaning. The continuous negotiation of meaning within and among members of a discourse group, considering context, history, and other extenuating factors, lends credence to the idea that constructing meaning and identity is an interactional process. This is in contrast with more structuralist conceptions of language socialisation theory, namely that all interactions can be placed within a socio-cultural structure, which can be studied and essentialised. This article's take on the matter blends both structuralist and post-structuralist theory. On the one hand, the author positions participants in her study, discussed later, in binary categories of local versus non-local and native English speakers versus non-native English speakers, and contrasts the behaviour of one group against the other. This binary positioning fits neatly within a structuralist approach. On the other hand, the author acknowledges the limiting nature of this binary categorization and speaks to the complexity of the interaction of identities within both groups, a more post-structuralist reading of the situation. Further, the author justifies her use of binary labels by pointing out this distinction is not an etiquette position of hers, but rather consistent with the emic categorizations of the discourse group themselves. My critique of her justification is that these labels seem to have been derived from the institutional outlook of the school wherein she conducted her study, and the comments of local students. But how do these so-called non-local or non-native English-speaking students classify and understand themselves and their own identity? This point is not explored in any significant depth. Thus, the author is favouring the dominant, institutionally sanctioned categories of students, which do not necessarily reflect the complexity of identities as understood by the individuals themselves. The tension between privileged and marginalised perspectives is understandably complex to consolidate. The next section of the article discusses the nature of ethnography of communication and how it may operate as a method for investigating language socialisation within classrooms. Ethnography of communication combines both etic and emic analyses of communication, as well as micro and macro level analyses of discourse. It may examine non-vocal verbal forms, such as written or signed language, non-vocal non-verbal forms, such as silence or gaze, vocal non-verbal forms, such as laughter, and vocal verbal forms, in other words, spoken language. In this way, it is an integrated framework for conducting qualitative and interpretive research in a variety of settings. Ethnography of communication shares many features with other applied linguistics research methods, but is unique in its focus on communication across cultures. The article goes on to further explain micro and macro analyses and etic versus emic analyses in ethnography of communication. Macroanalysis involves studying the attitudes and patterns present within the social, cultural, and historical aspects of a discourse environment. Macroanalysis may explore topics such as group identity, the multiplicity of identities, perspectives, and practices of individuals and groups, and the tensions inherent in such discourses. Conversely, microanalysis focuses on finer points of interaction and discourse, such as speech acts, turn-taking, thematic structure of a piece of communication, or use of personal pronouns. Micro and macro analyses are often used in conjunction to provide a more comprehensive view of the discourse community studied. This can be done by selecting a limited number of representative microanalysis discourse samples, which are contextualized with a macroanalysis overview. This seems to be the approach taken by the author for the second half of the article, in fact, in her study. I believe the ethnography of communication method of investigating language socialization in the author's study was effective. The macro and micro analyses and the emic and etic perspectives indeed provide an integrated view of the discourse group. The only criticism I have with its use here is that more micro elements could have been incorporated into the analysis. As it was, turn-taking and aspects of speech acts such as pausing and laughter were the main focuses. The set-out of the classroom was also included. However, aspects such as eye contact, body language, and the graphical representation of the text studied by the class were excluded. I believe the incorporation of more elements such as these may have provided a better picture of the language socialization taking place in the classroom. In its second half, the article describes the school environment in which the author conducted her study. The study focuses on language use and socialization within a grade 10 Canadian social studies course. The high school was a mixed ethnic makeup, with approximately 50% of students being of Asian descent 2% being First Nation peoples, and the remainder being mostly of Northern and Western European descent, including a significant Jewish population. In terms of language background, approximately 60% of students spoke English as a first language, with most of the others speaking Mandarin or Cantonese as their first language. The author used the terms ESL students and non-native English-speaking students interchangeably, in places drawing distinction between old-timers, students who had been in the country about 6 to 10 years before the study commenced, and newcomers, those who'd been in the country for about 3 or less years before the study. She refers to English as a first language students as local students. The author noted that the school was concerned with socio-cultural integration of newcomer students. In the specific class of 28 students studied, there were 17 non-native English speakers. 19 students altogether consented to participating in the study, including 10 local students from European, Chinese, Punjabi and First Nation backgrounds, 1 local girl whose first language status was unclear, and 8 non-local students, mostly Chinese. The author notes that the students sat themselves in ethnically distinct groupings. For example, the Asian students sat together. The class teacher was personally and professionally committed to inclusivity and mutual respect in her classroom. The article then describes a number of focal lessons, including transcript excerpts, which exemplify the socialisation and positioning of students during teacher-led whole class discussions. Turn-taking was the primary micro-element analysed. The author chooses to focus on lessons and excerpts in which the teacher attempted to elicit reflective and revealing commentary from Chinese students on issues of their own cultural practices and feelings of inclusion in their birth and new cultural environments. This strategy was effective in that the subject matter directly corresponded with questions of socialisation that the article is concerned with. However, since the subject matter was likely so personal to non-native English-speaking students, and the teacher's questions called on them to be so self-revealing in front of their local peers, their lack of extensive responses may have been due to the subject matter and their corresponding positioning itself. Topics more distant from their own identities may have yielded more elaborate responses because they probably would not have felt like they were being watched and judged so critically. It is unclear whether their patterns of interaction in class were consistent across topic matters or shifted, because the author is narrow in her inclusion of exemplar focal lessons. The next section of the article summarises and discusses the results of the study. One key comment made by the author is that the teacher's attempts to include the non-native English-speaking students often did not yield the results the teacher expected or hoped for. For example, the teacher often attempted to call on Chinese students on issues specific to Chinese culture or draw parallels between the First Nations people's experiences that they were examining in the text studied in class and those of non-native English-speaking students in the class. However, her attempts to position students in specific ways to the text being discussed were either resisted by non-response or undercut by non-elaborated responses or impersonal responses. Local students usually dominated discussions. The author attempts to present these findings objectively and without criticism directed towards the participants. This is despite her acknowledgement earlier in the article that it was imperative to research ways in which inclusive and accommodating classrooms can be created, which are both respectful and equitable. The author, however, does not even propose ways in which the teacher could have been more accommodating and equitable in her class delivery. It is noted that the teacher does not broadcast non-native English-speaking students' comments to the group, as she does with those comments from the confident local students. The author does not choose, however, to explicitly suggest that this disparity in treatment could correlate with differences in language socialisation between students. Nor does she suggest that it is even within the teacher's purview to displace more dominant voices in the classroom to provide better opportunities for those that are more marginalised. This lack of conclusion, in my opinion, makes the article as a whole less relevant and useful. The author noted that non-native English-speaking students were often othered by local students, and they face not only potential humiliation if they do not perform to local standards of language, but also disdain from local peers if they abstain from class discussions altogether. The author explains that despite the silence or minimal participation from the non-native English-speaking students, these students were negotiating a number of different identities, discourses and expectations, as much as, or even more than, local students. The author thus questions whether more outspoken local students should be considered the standard for language socialisation, and if so, why? Since the students' patterns of communication and interaction remains consistent during the 6-month course of the author's study, the language socialisation theory that non-native speakers' language use can or should move towards approximating that of native speakers is questioned by the author. She believes that non-native students drew from a wide repertoire of language and cultural communities and identities, even more so than local students. Their academic performance in the social studies class is also noted to have been stronger than the local peers in most areas. The decentering of the importance or inevitability of non-native English speakers approximating native English speaker style of language use was a central theme of the Widdowson article we examined in week 3. In The Ownership of English, Widdowson expounds the idea that non-native English speakers are competent, even if they do not model the language use of native speakers. This is because non-native English speakers use English in ways that are different, but still comprehensible and useful within their particular contexts. The legitimacy of variation of English grammar and other components is emphasised in the Widdowson article. So-called native speakers do not have monopoly on correct or virtuous use of the English language. My critique of Duff's work here is that she did not elaborate much on how non-native English-speaking students in the class she studied negotiated multiple identities, discourses or expectations outside of their need to balance teacher and local peer expectations. I believe she could have expanded more on how previous academic experiences, family experiences, and wider local community experiences informed these students' language use and socialisation within class. I also believe questions directed specifically towards how students perceived their own identities in the interview component of her study would have yielded better emic data on this topic. It would have been valuable to ascertain students' self-reported success in participating in discourse communities. It is understandable, though, that data has to be narrowed down somehow. The article concludes with some comments on methodology, including a criticism Duff received that she sided too strongly with the perspective of the teacher in her study. I would tend to agree with this assessment, as I believe this bias privileges the teacher's perspective while marginalising that of the non-native English-speaking students themselves. In conclusion, this paper contributes to a growing body of work on the ethnography of communication and language socialisation. Its focus on the classroom context makes it a valuable addition, which has possible ramifications for further study. It is particularly important that language socialisation within classrooms is better understood, so that more inclusive and equitable classroom environments can be fostered. My discussion questions for the article are, firstly, how do you think the methods employed by ethnography of communication can provide valuable insight when studying a discourse group without objectifying or essentialising the group study? Secondly, how should a researcher decide which data is pertinent for inclusion in their study and which is irrelevant? Or how should one find a balance between fostering a holistic view of the studied subject matter and overwhelming the reader with so much data that no conclusions can be drawn? Finally, what further research do you believe should be done on language socialisation within the classroom to help cultivate more inclusive and equitable classroom environments? Thank you for listening.